and welcome to Starfinder Wednesday. I'm Rob McCrary, the creative director for Starfinder, and I'm joined today by
John Compton. I'm the Starfinder senior developer.
And we are here to do a whole question and answer session on Starfinder lore. So any sort of questions that you have about the Starfinder setting, about the overall game, like behind the scenes stuff, whatever, we're here to answer those questions. We're not really going to be addressing rules issues at this point. So hold those or post those on the forums, but anything else about Starfinder and everything, we are going to try to answer your questions as best we can.
Does that mean that we're going to tell them what the answer to the gap is?
Yes. No, we are not going to tell you. That's a good thing to call out. That is, of course, one of the big mysteries of our setting. And that is something that, we've left for GMs to kind of play around with as they see fit. And we're not going to tell you what's the secret with that.
No, but every once in a while we have parts of our setting that do touch upon the gap. So as appropriate, we might bring in some of those.
Of course.
All right. So do we just want to see about jumping straight in and see if we have any questions going already?
Okay. Well, we can take one of the ones from the forums while people are getting. So Kishmo on the forums had asked, how are the relations between Oris and the Swarm? Oris is the chaotic neutral deity of evolution, responding to pressures and constant adaptation. So Kishmo says, Oris and the Swarm seem like two peas in a pod as long as you can look past the whole swarm is chaotic evil thing. So this is an interesting question. I think it's you can approach it from two different ways. Oris being mostly neutral, I don't think is probably interested in all of those sorts of aspects of evolution. The Swarm, for their part, though, they've kind of stepped away from deities. That's sort of in the origin of Hylax. Hylax, and the Shirans were initially part of the Swarm, and before the Swarm became the Swarm, when they were the Kucharn, they all worshipped Hylax, and then when they became the Swarm and got this hive mind, the Swarm kind of abandoned Hylax, and so I think that really the Swarm itself doesn't really truck with gods all that much.
Whereas one of the things that interests me about some of Starfinder's deities is that a fair number of them are pretty hands-off, like Oris, like Ibra, to an extent, Eloratu and some of the others are more like, you folks are doing cool things. You keep doing your cool things. We've hidden some secrets around. It'll be great. And Oris strikes me as one of those who's very hands-off, but would look on the Swarm and say, what you're doing there is some real fast evolution. Keep up the good work.
And maybe even seeing how the Swarm provides evolutionary pressures on other species and stuff. It's interesting. There's lots of ways you can do that. So I don't think there's really a direct relationship between the two. But there's certainly some interesting things there.
All right. So let's see. I see from Lori7x3. Do the alien runes in the Farstone reveal that Absalom Station was built by an unknown alien race?
Oh, that's the gateway, the mysterious gateway in one of the arms of Absalom Station. I would say no, because it is one of those things that anybody could have built both that gateway and Absalom Station, because Absalom Station's origin lies in the gap. So.
Yeah, Absalom Station's it's a weird mix of existing technologies, but also weird little secrets that couldn't or don't seem to be something that mortal hands might have crafted, at least not without help. So it seems as though Absalom Station could have been constructed in the gap by people, and they just happened to stick the Starstone in there or the like. Or perhaps they had help to make that gateway. Or deities could have said, wow, we want to give them some place that isn't Galarian. Whoosh! And lo, there was a space station that looked like something we would build.
And that's the key thing. I mean, is that everything about Absalom Station was designed for humans. Like, if humans fit in very specifically in there. So I think that it's answering, did somebody else actually create Absalom Station? If they did, it was created for humans, but there could certainly be bits and pieces on Absalom Station that were created by other things.
All right. Raven is asking, what happened to the Eldritch Alien ruins on the Acton South Pole? They're not referenced post-Pathfinder. So Acton had some neat stuff happening during the Pathfinder era, which were very much kind of hush-hush questions, where it kind of implied a possible answer, but left it to the GM to explore. So it seemed as though there might have been kind of some Lovecraftian style, like, are there Shoggoths or elder things down in the South Pole and North Pole, as well as some hints as to whether or not witchweirds were connected to bits of Actonian lore. In Starfinder, we definitely drilled down on a bunch of those things a lot more. So we said, yes, witchweirds. They did the thing. And I don't know that there's any definitive statement of what further stuff has been happening down in the South Pole, although I think that the Acton write-up in Pact Worlds references how the South Pole still throws off certain amounts of like communications and radio signals and things like that. So that's still a bit of a question mark as far as I recall.
This is one of those things too, it's we have to think about the scale of the Starfinder setting, because Akaton is one planet in a multi-planet civilization of the Pact Worlds, which is of course one spot of the galaxy. So when we were first writing them up, we had to both pick and choose some things from Pathfinder that we wanted to include while also providing new things about it for the future. And what that means is that some things get left behind, and we've already talked about this in some of our answers. In some cases, we're going to be giving more speculative answers just because we haven't had time to actually delve into all of these mysteries and everything in our published setting. And we're not going to just, we're going to try not to just make up answers for things now and say, this is what it is, if we want to present something later. So there are things that, particularly like if you look at something on the size of a planet, a specific location on a planet, there's so much you can do with a planet that we can't detail, and we haven't been able to detail like everything that's happening on that planet.
That said, one of the other challenges in World is that with the scanner technology and the spaceflight technology that exists within the Pact Worlds and beyond, when you're looking at a system as populous and as long-standing in the setting as the Pact Worlds, you might almost look at it and say, how do we not already know everything about each one of these planets? And sometimes we as developers and designers and the like come up with some, science fantasy appropriate reasons why there's still some patches of mystery out there for you to explore without having to leave the system. All right. McCree Bicklesquips from the forums is asking, do Skittermanders get a racial language? Is Skittermander a language? Imagine they had a language before the Vesk came along, so do you have any feelings on this one, Rob?
I do. Skittermanders do have a language. At the time when we first published them in Alien Archive, they just have the Vesk language listed because they are part of the Veskarium. That's one of the things with all the different species that we create. It's like a lot of them probably would have languages, but then we just get a larger official list of languages. But certainly, as you'll see in the forthcoming Near Space book, which has a whole little section on Vesk 3, the homeworld of the Skittermanders, there are Skittermander settlements and things that have Skittermander names. So it's certainly, there's also things that have been renamed by the Vesk, of course, because they like doing that. But I think they are a sapient species. They have their own language.
The thing that I'd add to that is the Vesk tend to have a behavior of coming into a place saying you're part of the Veskarium now. Here, adopt all of our policies and traditions. And the Skittermanders, as a helpful counterpoint, would probably look at the Veskarium and say, well, gosh golly, it sure would be troublesome for you guys to have to learn Skittermander, so why don't we just learn Vesk? That'll be way easier. So, in the spirit of being helpful, I imagine that the vast majority of Skittermanders learn Vesk over any Skittermander language if given a choice, because it's going to be more useful.
Most definitely. All right, Laurie7x3 asks, would a swarm god count as a single god or as a whole pantheon? Well, certainly their original god, Hylax, was a single god. It's interesting because the Attack of the Swarm adventure path.
I see this lowercase in the S for the swarm as a deity who is a swarm.
Who is a swarm, not the swarm. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, so whether that would be a pantheon depends on whether the individual swarm elements of that god were able to be worshipped separately.
Yeah, I think that's a cool question that we would approach differently depending upon what we need to accomplish for the setting. And so I could see, for example, a deity that is a swarm being a deity that has multifaceted elements, sort of like Gazra was in Pathfinder, where you have the air and the water aspects that are nonetheless a genus. I'm trying to remember what the formal name, geniform deity, where it has multiple forms. And so like one of them manifests at one point. Like there is the unity representation. There is the let's eat stuff manifestation, stuff like that. So you could have like multiple deities in one group.
Right. Well, that's an even Triune is 3 deities in one. This actually makes me think, though, of the Spathinae, our swarm creature from Alien Archive 3. And, you know, it's like we have the 20, what we call the core gods in the core rulebook, which are the ones that are most common throughout the galaxy. Of course, in an entire galaxy of countless sapient species, they're going to have their own gods too. They're just going to be more localized gods. But I would think that a swarm-based life form like the Spathinae would probably have a swarm-based god as well.
Probably, especially from the perspective of representation in your art. That was one of the cool things about the recently released Pathfinder Gods and Magic book, is that in addition to depicting the deity in sort of their traditional form, I'll say, would also show a piece of artwork of how they depict that deity or that deity's acts in some form of local culture. So anything from cave paintings of Rovagug all the way to like stained glass representations of Iomedae. I bet the Spathinae probably have some of the deities who we think of as having conventionally humanoid forms. Might be like a little swarm of Saren Ray holy symbols for all I know.
That's true. Well, we do have, and there is, it's kind of a little bit hidden at the beginning of the religion section in the core rule book, but because there's so many different races that even these core 20 gods do have different appearances. Like the Shirin's version of Sarenrae does not look like a humanoid angel. It looks like some kind of bug creature, because that's what speaks to them most likely. And so that's a bit of a change between Pathfinder and Starfinder, is how the gods also reflect the worshipers that they're speaking to at a particular time.
All right. So we have a question from Sparrowhawk92 who's asking about Melos, which is a proper noun off the top of my head I'm not recognizing. Rob, is that something that's fresh to you?
I believe that is one of the moons of either Leovara or Brethida.
Okay, so do you have an answer about the ruins on Melos that will ever be explored, or is it something you're keeping under wraps?
I don't think we have a specific answer for these like specific ruins. Those are because we're talking about a planet or a moon in one specific location. If we don't have like a full, and Sparrowhawks is Brethida, yay! Both of them have lots of moons. 2 gas giants, lots of moons. Got to remember which one is which. But something like that is usually left as an adventure hook for GMs to play with, or something we might pick up later, perhaps in a Starfinder Society scenario or something. But we try not to put in sort of interesting things that, like a specific set of ruins that we're like, aha, we're totally going to do something with that, because then other people, GMs who read that and want to do something cool, then we're kind of going against that. So likely we wouldn't, but it all depends on exactly what stories we want to tell. We don't have anything.
Yeah, and definitely putting adventure hooks into these gazetteers is a big thing that we ask of our authors. But I tend to take a slightly different approach than what you mentioned, Rob, where I tend to see including these possible hooks as future published adventure content as a good thing, because one of the things I love about it is it drives this sort of question where people say, oh my gosh, what is going on with Melos? Or what is the story with that door on Absalom Station? So when we finally have, our PaizoCon banquet and you go up there and you're like, the next AP is going to be the door on Melos, which leads to, or the door on Absalom Station, which leads to Melos. And everybody goes, oh my gosh, that's long last answered. Or as I've seen people ask earlier, like, when we figure out what the 6th rune of Aloratu is and what comes of that, that would be something where people would be like, we've known about that secret since day one. Oh boy.
I would put the 6th rune of Aloratu at a slightly higher tier than a single set of ruins on Melos. But we have ruins kind of all spread throughout the galaxy. And it could be something because of the whole story of Melos, as Zeta Raven has helpfully reminded me on the chat, is you had this culture that all sort of disappeared or ascended in some way. And so that could be the focus of a story. I'm pretty sure that may have even been the story in Pathfinder, that their inhabitants had already left at some point. But I would have to think about that.
All right. We have Lori 7x3 asking, does the Shirin Iomedae, do they look like a human as well? Is it even known that Iomedae was human? My understanding of Gap stuff, especially pre-Gap things, is that a modest amount of that information has survived. Like, people know that there was a Galarian. And some histories might still survive that say that Cheliax was a thing, even if there aren't details of exactly what happened to your PC in Pathfinder this one day. So I suspect, especially with Iomedae's faith carrying over into Starfinder as strongly as it does, that there's still some knowledge and lore about, like, the 11 miracles and trials, or that she was once a human and now she is a Star Crusader times.
Well, and she's actually viewed as the patron of humanity because of her because of her connection to Galarian, which is kind of, viewed as the homeworld of the humans. I think it is known that, her epithet has now changed to the Spirit of Galarian. That's like, instead of the Inheritor, because most of the races in the galaxy don't know what she was inheriting, because that's all Pathfinder knowledge. But she's the Spirit of Galarian and viewed as the patron of humanity. So I think she's an interesting thing, because although people know she's human, it all depends. She probably wouldn't be going to other races from that perspective, like, oh, by the way, I'm the goddess of humanity. She would be more focusing on her other aspects of, leadership and honorable battle and that sort of thing. And in that case, it kind of depends if you're going to get more of a connection by appearing as those people, because again, these are gods. They're not just that. She may have started life as a human, but she's not human anymore because she is a god. So that's how I would answer that one. This is an interesting question. I'm not sure how lore it is from Valor Gain, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Where in the Pact Worlds could you lead the most normal and safe life, do you think?
Castrovel. Castrovel feels like a real strong candidate here, because even though it's going to be a little bit warmer than Galarian as we knew it, which Galarian was basically Earth as we know it, then Castrovel has a lot of pretty darn safe places. Like, living on the continent of Asana is going to be real nice. And even some of the other continents are going to be a respectable experience. So long as you get past the elves being a little bit prickly on Sov or Severian. And if you're cool with, like, the motifs of ants everywhere for the Hivelands, then you're in pretty good shape. I would not recommend living on Ukulam, but it's one big preserve.
So I think the thing with that question is, like, what is safe and normal? Because it's going to depend on your perspective there. People native to Castrovel would think that was normal, but there's been lots of tension between the elves with the Formians. It's like, it could be any, because Verces, I think, it could also be kind of normal in that way, in terms of if you're living in the Ring of Nations thing, where it's just, you got a bunch of countries and they've all band together and everyone's just kind of, or even Absalom Station, because, that's like the size of New York City. It could be a very urban environment, and it wouldn't even feel like you're on a space station. Now, of course, it's unsafe if the space station busts open or something, but that's unsafe for everybody.
Yep. Let's see. Anarin Elendel, what about the megafauna and mold storms? This is something that showed up in one of our first adventure paths, the one that I wrote, Temple of the 12, which I sure was looking for hazards that could harm people, and mold storms were one of the ideas that came to mind. The idea that there's a massive sort of collective flowering, almost like pollen season in various parts of the United States, and I'm sure beyond, where all the allergies kick in. Only in this case, instead of it being pollen, it's a whole bunch of mold spores or fungal spores that can stick into your skin or eyes and start growing.
I think maybe they're saying it's not safe to live on Castrovel because of those reasons.
Well, that's why you have your environmental protections. They won't protect you against megafauna, but
as long as your batteries don't run out while you're going on your long cross-continental journey.
Details.
There's Kishmo brings up here on the chat about, I'd love to see Iomedae get introduced to the Veskarium. honor, justice, glorious combat. It is important to think about, these gods from a Pathfinder perspective. If you're coming at it from Pathfinder is very much focused on Galarian. So you have this one world, and that's what the focus of the gods are. Like Iomade has been introduced to the Veskarium. She's actually one of the more popular gods in the Veskarium because of her connection to battle and that sort of thing. How she initially appeared to them, I don't know, but it's because they're gods and they have this sort of, they have a much broader, they don't have to worry about spaceships to go to different planets and all that kind of stuff. It's like these core 20 are worshipped throughout the sort of civilized portion of the galaxy, which means that, Iomade has appeared to a lot of those people, and her interests speak to a lot of races is kind of how we view that.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. Lori 7X3. Is there any major things missing from the gap in other systems like the Veskarium we know of, like a whole planet? Because it always seems like the gap ground zero is based in the Pact World system. So one of the quick answers to that is every time that we're introduced to a new system, then we have an opportunity to explore what was the impact of the gap here. Whether it was people kind of waking up from the collective amnesia and making a really unfortunate decision based on no longer existent information. That could be the basis for what defines a system. It could be that, there are planets missing from other systems, or some of them might be ones where we just don't have enough records of what was true before the gap to really know if something's missing.
And it's also looking at, the Pact World is sort of the core focus of our setting, or like the most zoomed in part. Obviously, we have the planets, but we focus on the Pact Worlds as this entity. And so Galarian disappearing from the Pact Worlds is the major gap-connected event there. If you were to move your focus to another thing, maybe something did happen there. It's interesting that in the Veskarium, and this is something that we talk about in Near Space, and we'll be talking about that on the stream in the future and all that kind of stuff, is they had conquered their whole solar system. And in fact, we find out that the Vesk had conquered their whole solar system before the gap. Then the gap happened. Who knows what happened during that time? At the end of the gap, they went back to all their old records and said, oh, we actually owned this whole solar system. We better go and retake it before anybody else does. And did something else disappear there? We don't know, but they used their old pre-gap records of, hey, we conquered a solar system to reconquer that exact same solar system.
I really enjoy a lot of the gap events or the post-gap events where people are really confused, and each time we introduce a planet or something, they kind of just behave in a slightly different way that's always really exciting, where they say, oh gosh, all of our records disappear. Well, let's become a collective. Oh gosh, all of our records disappear. Let's fight until one of us is on top. It's always something weird and different. Tag 666 is asking, how did some of the new gods come along? So this would be folks like Ibra, this would be like Oris, Eloratu, and the like. So this is something where I was not working closely with the Starfinder team by the time that some of these deities were coming along, but I think, Rob, you had a pretty strong hand in these ones. Yeah,
I pretty much wrote the whole Pantheon section in the core rulebook at the time, and we had some discussions about that. One of the things we were trying to do at the beginning while we were designing Starfinder was how much to connect it to Pathfinder and how much not to. We knew we were going to get some people from Pathfinder coming to play Starfinder, but we didn't want to just, rehash the same things. And we hoped, of course, to get people who hadn't played Pathfinder so they wouldn't know what those things anyways. So it was kind of looking at the gods that were the core gods of Pathfinder and like, okay, what are the ones, for instance, Pharasma is the goddess of birth and death and everybody is born and dies. So it's like, well, that is kind of somebody that has to be there all the time. She has this role in the multiverse. But then you look at, it's like, well, Gorum is a very fantasy-based war god. Mm-hmm. And we had this new race that was a race of conquerors. That's the Vesk. And so, then we're like, well, who would the Vesk worship? And because they're such a part of our setting, that god is now going to become a more important god. And so it doesn't mean that Gorham is gone. It's just that in the galaxy of Starfinder, because of the Vesk and how powerful they are, the worship of Demoritosh has become greater. So in some cases, it was looking for those sort of, areas of concern and saying, do we want to give a more Starfinder-y or science fiction-y thing? And then there's other gods that are just like, what are some concepts that we want to do? So Triune, is about artificial intelligence and androids and the drift, which is an important thing. Just the whole concept of evolution for Oris that we talked about is the same. That's a scientific concept.
But one of the other things that I seem to recall going into this is also asking ourselves, what are our core species going to be? And does each of them have a deity to which they would default to worship?
Definitely. Because
none of them are by any means restricted to any of these, but, a Vesk will, all other things equal, probably look to Demoritosh and say, yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. You're pretty cool, buddy. Or Allura 2 for the, sorry.
No, Eurasa, Lashuntas have Eurasa.
And then Lao Shupo was sort of adopted in for the Yusoki.
And sort of elevated from her lesser deity status. And same thing with Besmara, the goddess of pirates. I've always liked Besmara since I worked on the Skull and Shackles adventure path. And I was like, I'm going to make Besmara the goddess of space pirates now. And she's going to be part of the core pantheon. So that was fun. Lao Shupo for Yusoki. Talavet for the Kasathas. Are we missing a race?
Triune
for the androids, yeah. So there was lots of different things, and we kind of ran the ideas by people to sort of Hylax and Sheeran, says Joe. Thanks, Joe. So it was interesting having those discussions and then trying to have, both a broad enough thing that we can kind of cover all the big areas, but of course, with a few notable exceptions, the other gods, if you're familiar with those from Pathfinder, they do still exist in the setting. They're just not as widely worshipped. They may have, it's the sort of rise and fall of fortunes. You don't see a whole lot of people worshiping the Greek gods on Earth anymore, for that matter. So.
All right. Corsair, 1961. It said that noirs favor orcish histories. How closely would noirs and orcs work together? This is going to be the realm of speculation for me. Because I don't think I've run across that particular tidbit or considered it strongly before. Is that one that you're familiar with?
Yeah, no, I'm not.
So with this one, noirs are very closely tied into Absalom Station, where that's sort of where they would consider home. And orcs have their strongest, basically have their stronghold on Aposte, alongside the Drow. So, yeah, I don't offhand. I don't know of any strong connection or inspiration to connect them.
Yeah, because we don't really have a noir civilization or a big orc civilization, except as how they're connected to the Drow on Aposte. So, I think you could definitely have individuals that look at that sort of thing, but there's not like a really huge overall cultural thing, because you don't have that, at least that we've seen so far. It is a big galaxy, so there could be those things, but there's just not something that's like, oh, here's this big noir planet and this is how they feel about orcs, because there hasn't been that sort of official interaction between them.
All right. Lori7x3 is asking, why are there only 5 delegates plus the steward head in the Pact Council and not one from every Pact member? Do we even know where the 5 members come from? So what I'm remembering from the opening of Pact Worlds is that every so often, I think it's like a 2-year cycle or so, that the Pact Worlds vote on who those delegates are going to be, and they are representing the Pact Worlds as a whole. Not necessarily, here's the Verces vote, here's the Acton vote.
Well, in the Pact Council, the Pact Council has the overall Pact Council has members from every Pact world. The Directorate, which is the overall head, is voted from those members. And I think this is really asking about the directorates, because the head of the steward is a member of that. And I think here we would make the comparison to the United Nations and the Security Council, is that not everybody is on the Security Council.
But also, I don't know that we have any permanent members of the Security Council to kind of forward that comparison.
No, but there's a smaller group that things can get kicked up to if it needs to have, where you don't want to get 500 people voting on it. in terms of where they come from, we do have some upcoming APs that are going to interact with that, including one that deals with the sort of election of the new directorate. So that information will soon be coming out in terms of more about how the directorate works and who the current members are, because they do change, because they don't have the permanent members, except for the general director. That's not his actual title, but of the Stewards.
Yes.
The Director General, maybe. Yeah.
All right. From Zitter Raven, my GM recently made our group be the reason why Absalom Station blew up. Good Lord. Gone. Poof. What sort of repercussions can we expect from that? Besides the ultra-strong drift beacon, why is my GM so evil? So the first bit, I would say, the answer to your last question is you're projecting your entire party is evil. You should come to terms with that and possibly go and be heroic from now on. What would the impact be for Absalom Station disappearing? First off, this is going to throw off a lot of what's going on in the Pact Worlds. Like, you've taken out the central part of their government, assuming they didn't have time to evacuate, because you're efficient PCs and we believe in you. Then, yeah, the Pact Worlds has gone from a united entity to something that is relatively headless. You're no doubt going to see some major factions springing up of those who have always doubted why there were Pact Worlds. You might see, for example, the Corpse Fleet sort of sneaking back in and being like, hey, Ox, now's the time to push back. You could take over. Remember that Mage Fire assault that we did in year 9 after the gap? We could totally do that again. Come on, welcome us back into the fold. And so you could have civil wars from some bad actors starting to try and start things up. You could also have several planets trying to jockey to be the new Absalom Station. Like, Verces and Castrovel, to me, both have really high opinions of themselves when it comes to system politics, especially with Verces being the planet that was like really technologically sophisticated before the whole gap thing happened up. So clearly, as the most urban of all the nations and planets, we should be in charge. We are the constant. We are the tidally locked. We are Verces. And of course, all the people pushing back and saying, bleep you, Verces. So yeah, I bet you could have some real cool fallout coming from all that stuff.
I think it's also, I mean, the fact that the Starstone is an ultra-strong drift beacon is a thing that makes the Pact World so powerful and influential. And losing that means nobody can automatically get there in 1d6 days. So the economic effects would be unheard of. And it's also important to think that Absalom Station has really strong defenses, much like the city of Absalom in Pathfinder. Absalom Station has been attacked multiple times and has always been able to repel those attackers. I can see and because again, it has a lot more powerful weapons than most people think, because its creation is sort of unknown. So if you were to suddenly lose Absalom Station because it blew up, that's a key defensive point of the Pact Worlds. I could also see the Vesk maybe wanting to revisit their old rivalry. It's like, wait, they don't have the station anymore? Time for the Vesk time for the Veskarium to step up.
Yeah, this uneasy truce that's existed ever since the Swarm stopped being as big of a threat. Well, clearly this peace has gone on long enough. Let's get a new emperor and take over the Pact Worlds.
Most definitely.
All right, Lori 7x7 or 7x3 is asking, will we ever see a picture of Triune? Maybe in an upcoming Starfinder Gods and Magics book. Wink, wink.
Well, we'd have to see 3 pictures of Triune at the very least, because there's 3 aspects to Triune.
Yeah, I mean, like there are a few Pathfinder gods where I consider them, I say they are, I could be fine without ever seeing a picture of them. That is even stronger for me in Starfinder, where several of the deities are ones where it is way more interesting to me to never picture them. Like, I personally don't think I ever want to see a picture of Oris, Triune, or Ibra, because that's not their nature. Like, Are you depicting the internet or the Matrix? No. Well, that to me is how Triune exists. Are we showing just a petri dish that's winking at you? No? Okay, then what is Oris? And to me, Oris is more charming if Oris doesn't have a big old physical form, unless it's like some sort of Fern Gully ooze creature or something like that. So I'm perfectly content not knowing the answer.
All I heard was a petri dish winking at me, and I'm thinking that that's what Oris looks like now. I'm just... That seems like you have established canon right there. No.
Sweet.
But Triune's also interesting because the Church of Triune, there are individual temples dedicated to just one of Triune's three aspects. So there may be like a Templar shrine that's really dedicated to the Cassandali part of Triune, in which case they would probably have an image of Cassandali or Bry or Epoch, even though they're one and the same, but they're also three separate things. So likely, I would even think that like in a temple that's dedicated to all three, it would just have Triune symbol because it's the all three in one kind of.
Yeah, and we've done some depictions of places of worship of Triune. For example, there's a season 1 Starfinder Society scenario where there's sort of a hidden shrine somewhere where it's really just decorated with like mathematical formula and the like, where that is the more important expression of what Triune represents than any figure. All right. Anarin Elendel, what do the gods say when they are pestered about where Galarian is, and what created Absalom Station?
Nothing. That is the one thing, and that's the gods do not talk about that. And I think the question for the mortal races of the galaxy is it because the gods are just as much in the dark as the mortals are, or do they just not want to tell? And that's even the gods haven't said that. So that is, again, because Galarian and Absalom Station came out of the gap, and the gap is the thing that no one knows about. Those are not the answers. Not even the gods are going to give you those answers. And so the real question is, do the gods know and are not saying anything, or are they just in the dark? I personally... Do you have something to...
No, go for it.
I personally think that they're just in the dark as well, but they would never, ever admit that.
I get the impression that there are some who do know and some who don't. But the ones who do know kind of have looked at each other across the room and been like, oh, no, we're not talking, are we? No. And sort of there's a rough agreement that sharing anything on this would be bad if any of them do know it. Lori 7x3... Is the machine court like the highest packed world court that handles only planetary affairs, or does it handle general affairs as well? I believe this is referring to the big court on Absalom, which is particularly famous or arguably infamous for offering a degree of protection for fugitive androids or anybody who's seeking their completely like by the book, let's throw it into the computer and see what dot matrix paper it spits out. Verdict. I'm not personally of the impression that it's an extension of Pact World's justice. I get the impression from my reading a while back that it's kind of an independent thing that the Pact World says, this is close enough to what we do that this is kind of your state court and we mostly respect it.
Yeah. And again, if you think of the United Nations as a model, the United Nations doesn't dictate the laws in individual member countries. And so it's the same thing. The Pact Worlds doesn't dictate individual laws on those planets. So the machine court is the main court of Abalon, but it doesn't have anything else within the larger Pact Worlds because it's not, the Pact Worlds isn't. It's interesting because like the Veskarium is an actual empire with a unified government. The Pact Worlds is more an alliance of individual worlds that each have their own laws. I just hit my microphone. Sorry about that. They each has their own laws and their own courts and all of that kind of stuff. So I think the machine court is really going to be more on planetary things.
Yep. Let's see. Roll for Combat asks, do you ever get sick and tired of answering questions about the gap? Of course, you can always tell everyone what happened and put it all to an end. I mean, yeah, that could spare us a lot of questions about the gap, but we'd also probably get some questions of, but why is this? Or what's the ramification of this thing being true? And do we ever get tired of questions about the gap? Only when we run out of fun ways to deflect them.
Plus, our memories of what happened during the gap have been wiped too. It's a sad fact of the gap.
Well, I guess that answers the questions of whether the deities know what happened or not.
No, they're different.
Uh-huh. All right. Oranon, did no other gods ascend via Starstone between Pathfinder and now? If there were, would the gap have erased them from existence since everyone had their memories wiped? So the second part first for me. If another deity had ascended via the Starstone during the gap, there might be no records of them having ascended, but that doesn't necessarily erase that deity. The gap, as far as we can tell through what the settings conveyed, has not robbed any deities of their power. Iomedae is still Iomedae and still has divine power. Caden, Kalian, and and Norgorber are probably off wandering, doing their own thing, and have not been, de-divined. So if there had been another person who had ascended by the Starstone, then there's probably still a deity out there somewhere. As for whether or not somebody ascended since the time of Pathfinder, 4717 or so, corresponding with when Starfinder got published. I mean, that's kind of the future of Pathfinder. So,
in terms of the Starstone being on Absalom Station, again, that all happened during the gap. Mm-hmm. After the gap, the Starstone has been locked up, and even the Starstone defenders and all the people that run Absalom Station don't know how to actually get to the Starstone. So currently, at least, nobody knows how to get to the Starstone to actually do it. That could perhaps be some kind of trial, but certainly from the gap on, and of course, and as John said, when we're talking about before the gap, that's talking about Pathfinder or the future of Pathfinder, and that's the kind of stuff. So certainly, of course, as with anything, in a home game, you could do whatever you wanted to with that if you wanted to. But we certainly have not said that there are any gods that did that.
That would be a fun plotline, though, of the Starfinder Society going off and exploring new bits of space and eventually runs into some sort of super powerful being. And they're like, who are you anyway? And it's like, the only thing I remember from the gap is I did the test of the Starstone. And it's like, oh, damn.
Or they don't even remember they took the test of the Starstone. The gap ends, and all they know is that they're a god. And then they have to go around proving to everybody else that they're a god because they don't even remember how they became a god.
Yeah, it's like, what's your etiology? Funny. What's your mythos? I don't know.
Memory wipes for everyone.
All right. Oranon asks, hang on. Sorry, we already did that. Lava Bean asks, with the prevalence of technology in this setting, are there many societies that instead rely heavily on magic or even considering technology taboo or anathema? I can think of at least one. Alien Archive 3 has the Hanakens, which are the velociraptor-like creatures that live on a volcanic, mostly toxic atmosphere planet and have space algae in their lungs that helps them breathe. And they are specifically very, as we might call them, Luddite, in saying that magic is good, claws are good, space technology bad. So we do have at least some of that. They're the one I can think of off the top of my head.
And certainly, again, the huge galaxy, yes, there are places that it's impossible for us to detail every place in there. I think probably as we go forward, we'll see more of those things. We're still kind of delving into sort of the core elements of our setting, and I think we'll have to, as we see more and more stuff, we'll have more opportunities to show off some of that other things.
One of the other groups that springs to mind are the Izl Guns, which we introduced during season 1 of Starfinder Society, which were specifically presented as a species that had been very technologically advanced and now are not as technologically advanced, or at least have kept that to only certain spheres of influence, and less from they were once great and then they got hit by a meteor and now they forgot everything. No, it's that they specifically chose to back off from where they were, which is in a way kind of a repudiation of the idea of having a lineal progression of civilizations, which are always fraught prospects in anthropology, and showing species that have more of a winding path to what is right for them in their modern era is much more interesting to me. All right. Zazil asks, if a post-god swarm looks to become a god, would a certain mantis step in? If a post-god swarm.
This might be talking about the god host from the Attack of the Swarm Adventure Path, which I don't want to talk too much about because of a spoiler. I mean, the certain mantis, one would assume we're talking about Achaekek, who does not officially exist in Starfinder, but again, we haven't said he doesn't. I don't think so. Because Achaekek is not in Starfinder, I haven't done a whole lot of reading on him recently. But it's not about trying to keep people from becoming gods. I mean, he was the assassin of the gods. Do you remember?
There have been various points in Pathfinder, because Chekek has kind of wandered a little bit as to quite what his MO is, where at certain points it's been killing off upstart would-be gods, like the ones who are just on the cusp of it, and sort of like a back in your place sort of situation. And, you know, a Chekek might intervene, but part of the notion of what's going on with Starfinder is that, like, there's greater acknowledgement that the cosmos is an even bigger place, and any one deity has, even to me at least, a little bit less of a universal power or ability to step in and do one thing, because the scope has expanded so much more, and there's so much more room for intervention of these other deities and the like, that personally, when I'm doing Starfinder stuff, a Chekek just does not cross my mind as a variable.
And that's, I think, you could also, like, again, with that scale of everything, it's like, well, maybe you would think that he would come after this swarm god, except he's all the way on the other side of the galaxy dealing with this other upstart god that no one in your part of the galaxy has ever heard about. I think the swarm is also a big enough threat and has gone to enough places that they're a big enough piece that probably that would not attract, because I don't think that a Chekek would view that as like a upstart kind of thing. If you've got this world devouring swarm,
eat enough worlds and you too can become a god. All right, Lori 7x3. Are the stewards able to build their own portals with their own portal mages, or do they just collect the knowledge of accessing known portals?
Well, they do have their own system of the draws, I believe they're called, their own system. And I think we've been pretty mysterious about what exactly the nature of those is. And probably the stewards themselves would be pretty close-lipped about what exactly the nature is, because that is one of the things that gives them an advantage.
It does seem that in Starfinder, there's a certain degree to which portal technology exists, but portal technology is not as ubiquitous as you might expect in a science fantasy setting where, like, magic is roughly on par with technology. Like, we have the Ayudara, which, you know, they exist throughout Castrovel and jump between a couple of different planets. But as of Starfinder, if I'm recalling correctly, the elves no longer seem to have the ability to build more of them. And there seem to be several other portal systems where it's like, we have these ones now, let's keep them in good shape, though, because we may know how to, like, service them, but we don't know how to build more, or it's going to be really expensive to build more of them. So yeah, that'd just be an overtone that I would consider with anything that we do with the stewards and those gates.
And we have lots of things, not only portals, you know, with portals and ruins and that kind of stuff that exist, but are no longer working the way that they originally did, and they're not sure who created it. And that, to me, speaks, with all these things together, speak to sort of the existence of ancient progenitor civilizations that have been around long ago, and pieces of them still exist, but are not really well known. And that, to me, is a really interesting thing, is that there's always these things, and it's like, we have, you know, interstellar travel, we have the drift, we have super powerful lasers and everything, and then, but wait, there are all these, like, gates that go halfway across the galaxy that we have no idea who built or why and everything. And that's, you know, there's always something beyond or even before that I think is interesting to do.
Well, especially now that we have witch warpers. I also like to think that, you know, some of those witch warpers are out there being like, I'm going to hang around this portal because the moment they open it up, oh boy, I'm going to summon in other realities because woohoo, magic times. And at this point, some portals have just been shut down because the local witch warpers are just such a nuisance.
Yeah.
Dang witch warpers. All right. I Demand Platyparians is asking, now that we can frequent Octurne, how has that impacted the Dominion of the Black? So the Dominion of the Black, I mean, has always occupied the Dark Tapestry, among other places. And although Octurne was certainly a foothold for them in the time of Pathfinder, from what I recall reading, that, like, there may be some little outposts, and there are certainly some cultists doing their thing over there, but I don't know that there are a whole bunch of Nithalgu running around.
They're not running around, but what the Dominion of the Black is sort of engaged in a struggle with the Elder Mythos. That's our Lovecraftian things. And on Octurne, there's a lot more of that Lovecraftian bit, sort of great old ones and that sort of thing. And in terms of how it's impacted, Octurne actually serves as a magnet for Dominion of the Black influence in the Pact Worlds. So because they're engaged in this big struggle, most of the Dominion of the Black's focus is on Octurne itself. And that's one of the reasons why the rest of the Pact Worlds let Octurne do its weird stuff out on the edges of the system, is because it provides a very important defensive shield in terms of the really yucky stuff from far, far off in the galaxy is going there and not attacking Absalom Station. So it's, I guess we've even hinted, I think, that the Dominion of the Black may even come from beyond our galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. They are a threat that is in a truly alien setting. The Dominion of the Black is a truly alien threat, even to most of what is in the core galaxy of Starfinder. And so it doesn't have much impact on them, but that is kind of where their presence exists in the Pact World, because they're fighting and jockeying for position with the cults of the Elder Mythos on Octurne.
Voiceless Trout asks.
He can't. He has no voice.
Well, that's why they're typing.
Oh, got it.
Since the Eldest are still around, is the First World still in existence? I imagine it's accessible, and I seem to recall recently editing and developing a section that references a little bit of touching on the First World. So
it has a very brief mention in the core rulebook. We have like one page that talks about the planes, and the First World was like a first draft of the material plane, and the Starfinder galaxy exists on the material plane. So the First World definitely exists.
Lori 7x3, many people think androids are machines. What do you tell them? I assume tell those people, not tell the androids. Because it's going to be a real sad conversation for the androids. Like, some people, yeah, I mean, that's just cruel. I mean, you can go two different directions with this one. You can either be smarmy and say all biology is basically machinery, which I don't know whether that's going to help anybody in this conversation. Or you tell them that both in reflections of philosophy, ethics, and legislation, androids are free and free-willed entities that should not be enslaved in the Pact Worlds, and they're people too, so get with the times.
Officially, I think they're biomechanical organisms, and we do have a good counterpoint in the SROs, sentient robotic organisms, that came out in our Pact Worlds book, which are full-on robots. They are 100% mechanical. Androids have some biological components, so they're a mixture of the two of them.
Last Slamra is asking, something I've been curious about in the Starfinder setting is whether real-world eponyms go by different names, like Hawking's radiation, Hammond transfers, that sort of thing. Two different philosophies, or little points on this one. One of them, almost certainly, like somebody discovered it, that many of the cultures who discovered these things probably said, yes, whoever discovered it should name it after this, or we'll name it in honor of Demoratosh, or whatever the heck it was. As far as how I would be inclined to approach it from a development standpoint in one of our books, is I would rather use whatever the known real world term is if I'm trying to just reference that, because I want it to be something that I can convey in a couple of words. And if you want to look up what that is, fine, you have some way of looking it up. If I just make up a garbledy-garbs theorem and don't provide the context to explain what it is, then I've provided non-information.
Yeah, from a behind the scenes perspective, we tend to, both in Pathfinder and Starfinder, if it's something named after a real world thing, we tend not to mention it, because then that's like, well, why would you? Because it, particularly in an in-world thing, if we were to talk about Hawking's radiation, people are like, well, wait, how does people in Starfinder know who Stephen Hawking is? So we wouldn't in-world call it Hawking radiation, because it's kind of a disconnect. And so, I mean, with Starfinder 2, we try not, that's also a little bit more scientific than we usually go, because we can also say it's fantasy, and also we're not all astrophysicists, and we don't want to get it wrong. So it is something, we've mostly avoided it, but we tend to not bring in real world things. There was something that came up, and I don't remember what it was, but it would be like this is not the example, but something like a Roman font. We wouldn't use that in world, because even though we don't think of it as having any connection to Rome, that name obviously comes from that. So, yeah.
Lord7x3 is asking, are the stewards able to build their own portals with their own portal?
We already answered that one.
Yeah, hang on.
We skipped it.
Oh, all right.
Or we...
Dire Mosasaur from the forums asks, Alien Archive lists Aeons as neutral, like they were in Pathfinder 1st Edition. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they have changed to be lawful neutral. Are there any plans to explain why they are neutral again, or retcon them to be lawful neutral in Starfinder?
This is a good reason for the gap. This is one of the sort of meta reasons why we created the gap, is so that we could kind of keep these things separate. So, they were neutral. So that's what we made them in Starfinder. Pathfinder then changed things up for 2nd edition. And that's the kind of thing these games have to be able to exist on their own and evolve on their own. So in terms of explaining why they're neutral again, they've always been neutral in Starfinder. If you're trying to connect Pathfinder 2nd edition to Starfinder, it's something happened in the gap is the best thing that we can use to explain that. We probably wouldn't retcon them. Unless, like farther down the line or we were doing something. But that's not something that we would like errata in a book for, just to match what another game does.
They'd really have to be accomplishing something in particular in Starfinder for us to consider changing what their base alignment is. And to an extent, that was the discussion that happened with Pathfinder, and they decided that, yes, this is in fact something that needs to change. So until we have that impetus or need, then there's no reason to just stir up that Aeon's ant's nest.
Dire Mosasaur, because a normal Mosasaur isn't scary enough, says, is there any trivia you can share about how the Pathfinder era deities or their worshippers have adapted to modern 320-ish AG times and ubiquitous technology?
So Rob and I were looking at this question before the stream started, and
that was from the forums. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, and we both kind of came away from it with a different interpretation of the question. I had it as a reading of what are some of the Pathfinder deities who weren't brought in as core deities in Starfinder up to, like Caden, Kaling, and Norgorber, whereas Rob, I think you had seen it as more...
As about the deities that we did bring from Pathfinder and how have they changed beyond what we've said.
So shall we each tackle one of our...
Sure.
Okay, who do you want to start with?
Well, I would start with... part of it is in a couple of instances, we haven't gone into too much detail on the gods themselves. In the Pathfinder, we've done a few things. And we tried to cover the main things in the core rulebook. I'm trying to think of like one of the gods. You can even see how some of the things changed, like Besmara, who I talked about before. She was a goddess of sea monsters. Now she's kind of also a goddess of space monsters and space hazards. And just the whole fact that of moving from becoming like a maritime-based deity to something as big as space, I think opens up all sorts of possibilities. And although it's still focused on pirates, it's just, I think maybe it's just kind of interesting to think like on a planet with a lot of water and there's water-based pirates, do they still worship Besmara, or do they view her as only a space pirate goddess? And do they have their own local pirate gods? So, it's kind of a hard question because there's so many different cultural things that are tied to it that it's like, how would that actually change? So I don't know if I actually have any good answers.
I can provide a speculative answer on my end, which would be canon that nobody would ever be able to confirm or deny in the setting. Norgorber. I suspect that Norgorber has taken on several different groups and or secondary areas of interest, namely the anonymity of the infosphere. I suspect is way in line with Norgorber as well as cybercrime. But I can see just the embrace of what digital existence can open up for a deity of thievery and murder and crime and anonymity and secrets just reflects so well on some of our modern day technology tropes like the internet. So I think Norgorber has a home there. Every 10th troll you run into, probably Norgorber.
I think in a lot of things too, it's in terms of like the the current Starfinder deities who came from Pathfinder 2 is because they're gods and they have, it's like in the Pact world, that's a very high-tech, futuristic society. They're going to address that. But there are still societies in the galaxy with medieval level tech and all that kind of stuff that god still needs to be able to speak to. So it's not like the gods themselves have changed too much. It's just and perhaps during Pathfinder times, there's high-tech people out in the galaxy too that they're doing. So the gods themselves may not need to actually change themselves too much. It's just their worshippers bring in more of that stuff. But I do like the cybercrime aspect of Norgorbur. It's a lot of fun.
Peyton, do you want us to take on this last question and then we call it?
Like it. Yeah, we're just about out of time.
All right. So Kishmo is asking, any personal favorite lore tidbits to share on stream?
Do you have a favorite lore tidbit?
Who am I? There are a lot of little aspects that I really enjoy, and a lot of them are ones where it's taking some sort of scientific aspect or consequence and applying it to a society. So I'll go with Recreaches. I just really enjoy the notion that you can have societies, civilizations, or species evolve in a high society sort of way, completely underwater, and addressing what that means from a technological standpoint. And when you don't have writing, what do? Well, you can develop and evolve cool ancestral memories and super mathematical skills. So by the time people with starfaring technology do arrive, you can be like, having looked at your ship for 30 minutes, I can tell you how to rebuild that thing. And I can do it better than you is charming to me.
I think for my favorite thing, this is some lore that hasn't come out yet. So I'm going to kind of answer two questions with one. This is something from the near space where we expand quite a bit on the Vesk and the Veskarium. And there's an interesting little tidbit that I can share here that I kind of liked, which is that Vesk are an egg-laying species. They're born from eggs, and there's a common cultural thing that a lot of Vesk will save a portion of their eggshell, and then when they come of age, they will then ritually dedicate that piece to Demoratosh or whatever god and everything, and it's kind of to symbolize passing from childhood to adulthood, and just kind of, it's like a cultural tradition that, it's like, well, that's a cool little thing. So that's a little bit of lore, and we'll be talking about on some upcoming streams more about Near Space and the Veskarium, and that book will be coming out soon. So I'm excited really about all the stuff in that. And I think that is just about all the time we have. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.